Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Zabrowski. I serve as the Executive Director for Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization. And I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm very excited about today's topic and our presenter. But before I dive in, I want to welcome everybody from last week and any new participants that are joining us and do a quick recap from last week's session. Last week, we had Intuit join us from all over the US to develop and create the first process of design thinking, which is essentially the entrepreneurial way to create new ideas. For those of you in an academic setting, you've seen this before, and for the college students here that may not have had an entrepreneurship course just yet, you will likely see it in your courses upcoming. Last week's session, titled Business Creativity, Identifying an Opportunity, we worked through a mural board, which actually allowed all of the participants to interact and engage and work through the first stage in the design thinking process. Today, we're going to focus on business ideation, the creativity behind solutions. And I'm very excited about our presenter today. And before I go any further, I just want to take a moment to reintroduce you to Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization in the event that you are not familiar with our org. We were founded in the early 70s with a purpose to inform, support, and inspire college students to be more entrepreneurial. We do this by establishing entrepreneurship clubs at university and college campuses nationwide. We have over 250 different chapters and about 16,000 members. Our purpose is fulfilled by creating that strong community of student entrepreneurs that are interested in launching businesses. And from that model, they create incredible new ventures that leave a lasting impact on our growth as a community. We fund some of these ventures at our global conferences and through our pitch competitions. We also have regional conferences that are upcoming and available to all students, regardless of your affiliation with Collegiate Entrepreneurs Organization. So if you have an interest in engaging further, feel free to reach out to any of us on this chat. And my colleague, Dean Misek, our membership coordinator, membership and events coordinator, is here as well. And he is going to monitor the chat for us this afternoon. So to talk about today's topic, business ideation, the creativity behind solutions, really as an entrepreneur, the solution becomes the business. And the first step is identifying that opportunity or really identifying that problem. And we went through some exercises to help us do that last week. And this week, we're really going to try and get laser focused on creativity. And our presenter today is going to really help lead that charge. Joining us is Jeffrey Madoff. He is an author of Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas, a producer, a professor, a playwright. And instead of reading his very impressive bio, we thought that it would be great to share his video reel of his production company and just a bit of his work. I'm going to go ahead and share that right now. This is Jeffrey's video portfolio. It's a marketing piece that he shows to prospective clients to give them an idea of the type of work that he does. So give me one moment while I share my screen. Really fantastic work, Jeff. I'd love for you to join me with your camera and microphone at this time. And I'd also like to invite our attendees to share their video if they'd like, just so that we can interact and see your expressions. You do not have to turn on your video, but you're welcome to do so. So Jeff, do you want to just give us a quick hello and we'll dive in from there?
Well, thanks for having me today, James. My exposure to your group before was a total pleasure. So I'm very happy that you invited me back. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're happy to have you. So Jeff, today's session is really centered around creating that solution, right? And last week, our students kind of worked through the process of that initial exercise necessary to identify a problem. And today, the hope is that from your exposure as a creative, they can think of new ways to solve problems. So can you talk a little bit about creativity and how you've paired creativity to your professional career, your entrepreneurial endeavors?
Sure. And you guys can use your emoji symbols, but I'm curious, how many of you consider yourselves creative? You can either turn on your camera if you would like, or just put up the hand signal. Well, it's good your associate considers himself creative, James, so you're in good hands there.
Right.
Because what I'm curious, and Tony, good. I start off with that question because it's really important to define what creativity and what entrepreneurship are. And the purpose of my talk today is to break down the barriers that separate different creative careers so we can learn from other creative pursuits, and rather than separate and isolate them, and what creative people go through in the process of bringing ideas to life, the struggles, the risks, the doubts, the exhilaration. And they're more similar than different, no matter what the business is. Like James showed you my fashion reel, but I also have another reel that works with private equity and investment banks. Totally different approach, but the point of it is I target my reels and my marketing to the audience that I'm going after. And when you bring ideas to life, it's also understanding the business of being creative, because the essence of entrepreneurship is creation of a business. And I'd like you to ask questions throughout. I think Dean will be moderating it. And I want to have this as interactive as possible so you guys can get as much out of it as you can. And the reason I do these kinds of sessions is I learn from you guys in terms of what your concerns are, how you look at things. So the more conversation we can have, the better, and we'll all get more out of it. And a misconception about creativity is where I'd like to start. And that misconception is that you must be a painter, a writer, an actor, somebody in the arts in order to have a creative career. But I would argue that a dentist developing a new drilling technique that is fast and doesn't hurt, a teacher finding a unique way to reach a troubled student, a coder, lawyers, or an entrepreneur starting a business are all using their creativity to organize the information they're presented with to solve problems. And creativity is how we shape and express who we are and what we know. And it's a compelling need to bring about change in how we feel or how we see. And business is how we support that. I'm going to tell you about my creative journey through different careers and what I learned about creativity and making a living with my ideas. And I teach a course called Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas at Parsons School of Design in New York. Next Tuesday, I begin my 15th year teaching the course, which I love doing and I love teaching. And there is a book out about my course, same name, Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. I have a visual aid here, which I'll show you. And I'm particularly proud of the cover because my daughter, who's a graphic artist, designed it. So the question is, for you guys in particular, what is an entrepreneur? Because when one refers to entrepreneurs, they're most often talking about someone who starts a business. And that takes us back to what I said about artists and actors and musicians and performers, because in many ways, I think they're the truest entrepreneurs. Because there's no proof of concept until they succeed. So they're really putting themselves at risk in quite a unique way. And they're constantly at risk because they are the product. Unlike developing an app or something new that is some kind of an object, they're not even selling a service, they're selling themselves. And that's a risky place to be. There's no business plan to follow. And there is no problem they're solving or need they're fulfilling in the traditional product service model. So being an entrepreneur in general, although not considered creative, I maintain is a creative act because it starts with an idea. And in order to mean anything, that idea has to be brought to life. And it's interesting to me, if you plan on being an accountant, a dentist, or in finance, nobody asks you, what's your fallback position? But if you're going to try to build a creative career as an artist or an actor or a writer, or musician, the question that's most often asked is, what's your fallback position? Well, I didn't have a fallback position, by the way. The question for all businesses are the same, whether you're asking them to try a streaming service, an electric toothbrush, an app, or clothing. The big questions are as follows. Does anybody like this other than me? Does it somehow enhance your life? Does it make doing something easier or faster? Does it solve a problem? And I think those are really critical questions to ask. And I see, Carly, you're right. Someone who has an idea that's not enough to be an entrepreneur, Carly. What you need to do is bring those ideas to life. In the first day of class every semester, I say to the students, how many of you have walked into a gallery or a store and thought, oh, I could have done that. I could do that. And just about everybody raises their hands. And then I said, what's the difference between you and them? And the answer to that is usually silence at first. And then I see somebody light up and they say, they did it. I said, what'd you say? They actually did it? I said, that's right. Because in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to bring that idea to life. And that's what all creatives do, by the way, is they bring ideas to life. So Carly, thanks for your comment, but it's one step further than someone who has an idea. It's someone who then executes on that promise and brings it to life. And there's really important personal questions that are very important because answering these helps you set a compass for your life, which I think is really important to do. And the younger you do that, the better. That doesn't mean that you can't change your mind along your path and so on. But there are questions that I think are so important that most people never ask, or they ask it when they're hitting some kind of crisis in middle age. But I think if you start off younger, asking yourself these questions, it helps you set up a compass with moving forward that can be very useful. And I think brings something else that's really important in life, and that is fulfillment and happiness. So I'm going to give you some of the questions that I ask my guests. And I've had CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, people such as Ralph Lauren, who runs a multi-billion-dollar international company, to people who are artists and actors and don't have empires, but what they have is very successful entrepreneurial lives. And the first question I ask is, what did you love doing most when you were a kid? When do you feel most connected and engaged with what you're doing? Do you feel supported in your efforts by friends or family? How is that support expressed? What does freedom mean to you on a personal level? What are your core values? What can you do to align your creative pursuits with your values? And if you made a lot of money doing something you hated, would you consider yourself a success? What is success for you? I graduated from the University of Wisconsin in Madison with a double major in philosophy and psychology. And I tried to get a job as a wise man, but the wisdom factories weren't hiring. So I got a job in a small clothing boutique. One day, a friend of mine called and told me he'd saved up some money and asked if I could think of a gig that would earn more than bank interest. And I knew what clothes sold, and I knew that I could draw. So I said, I'll start a clothing company. I knew nothing about design. I knew nothing about getting clothes made. So I cut a shirt apart to understand how it was constructed. That's how naive I was. But I needed to learn the process of how to turn an idea into an actual piece of wearable clothing, which could be manufactured at a reasonable price, sold to a retailer for a profit, delivered on time, and ultimately sold to a consumer. And then, and here's a big part, get paid. And I had to run the business and be creative. That friend of mine, by the way, sent me what was more money than I had ever had at one time. That was $2,500. I didn't know if that was a lot or a little. I, of course, quickly learned that that was not very much. But what I did was I hired seamstresses to make some of my designs. I put them in the store where I worked, and they sold out within a day. I put more in, they sold out just as fast. I had the seamstresses sew some more of my designs, strapped them on the back of my motorcycle and drove to Chicago. I went to 18 stores and sold to 14 of them. I had what you call in business a proof of concept. You can't be the only one in love with your idea. You need to validate it by finding out if there are people out there who want to buy what you are offering. That's, of course, essential for any business. Now, my business grew very quickly. In less than 2 years, I had 2 factories with more than 120 employees in Wisconsin. I had sales reps across the country and an office in New York. I was chosen one of the top 10 young designers in the United States, which wasn't hard at that time. I think there were only 8 of us. And I was 22 years old, and I wanted to express my creativity and make a living doing it. That was not something that was taught in school. You're really lucky to have a program like this in organizations like the type that James captains. I learned by observing, experimenting, making mistakes, and meeting people who were doing what I wanted to do and asking them lots of questions, which again is why I hope you will ask me questions today. I regularly came to New York for business, and the more time I spent there, the more I wanted to be there. And my backer, who had financed my business because I created jobs for the people in Wisconsin, told me he would not continue to finance my company if I moved to New York. If I moved, the business would close. Would I look like a failure? I wouldn't have a job. I didn't know anybody there, and I didn't have a place to live. So I was constantly warned about the huge risk I was taking. People asked me if I was afraid of what would happen if I moved. I wasn't. I was afraid of what would happen if I stayed. Money comes and goes. Time only goes. So I made the decision to close the business and move to New York. I met some people who were starting a video company to shoot fashion shows, which hadn't happened yet. And this was a new idea at the time. And they were intrigued by my fashion experience, and I was intrigued by film and video. So I taught myself how to light, shoot, and edit. And within a few months, I had segments on all the major television networks. I then started my own company. My first client was the legendary designer Halston. My second was Ralph Lauren. And over the next 30 years, I worked with some of the top fashion and beauty brands in the world to create commercials, music videos, documentaries, and other branded content. And I was approached by a professor at Parsons who asked me if I would be a guest lecturer in his class. And I did and loved doing it. And I was then asked to develop a course that I could teach on a regular basis. And my goal was to create a class that I would want to attend. I didn't have the best attendance record personally in college because I think that there's lots and lots of, there are no boring subjects, but there are lots of boring teachers. And so I wanted to be not one of those. Didn't want to be a boring teacher. I wanted to be someone who could engage students in education. And thank you, Nathaniel. Because education, you don't get an education, you take an education. And that means by being constantly involved, constantly questioning, constantly pushing boundaries so you can learn things. And each week, I'm really fortunate because I get to interview a wide range of people. And teaching is a fantastic way to learn. And I really like it. And when I say to you guys that I learn from you when I do these kind of speaking engagements or when I'm teaching the class, it's true. And that's why I do it, because I have insatiable curiosity and I constantly want to feed that curiosity by hearing about new ideas and sharing ideas and having those ideas challenged too. So I interview these people. My students get to ask questions of high profile speakers with successful creative careers. And we talk to them about what they do, why they do it, and the obstacles that they've had to overcome on their path. And my guest careers are quite diverse, but the creative and business processes they describe are often strikingly similar. Whether they founded a startup, were a visual artist, or a journalist, their cumulative advice revealed patterns, universal protocols, and best practices for making a living with your ideas. And I recognize the same patterns in my own journey. Everything I've experienced informed what I did next. The skills I used as a designer translated directly into the film industry. I had to come up with a creative idea, be able to communicate it clearly to others, figure out the labor and materials needed, cost it out, and be able to sell the product at a profit. For too long, our culture subscribed to the myth that some people are good at business while others are creative. Not both. Can I get a quick little hand icon up there? And how many of you consider yourselves not creative? Oh, come on, James, for sure you are.
I have to tell you, I don't see myself as a deeply creative person. But, you know, I like to think that I surround myself with, you know, filling my voids. And I love what you've said so far. I do want to chime in and just touch on something real quick, because I think it's really powerful. You, as you were going through your career, as you're kind of talking about those early beginnings, started as a fashion designer, recognized that there was a void in the market to start creating content, visual content for the fashion industry. And so you took that next step. You were contacted at a later date by a university to consider becoming a professor, and you took that step. I often like to believe that entrepreneurs' biggest challenge is finding and identifying the right opportunity. So, you know, for you, how did you know that these were the right, you know, next steps? Did you know? Was it just following your passion as a creative individual? What did all of that look like? And if you have plans to talk about that later, feel free to table this or, you know, jump in now.
No, I think it's a great question, James. Thank you. And an important question. Because I didn't go around and think about what are the problems I can solve. Oh, I'll build a business out of it. You know, because if I happen to be in an area that there was a shortage of cinder blocks, and if somehow I could stockpile cinder blocks, solve the problem of the shortage in that area and make money, I still wouldn't do it. You know, so it's not about that. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, there's other reasons we pursue what we do, and other reasons that something is attractive and something isn't. And you don't start a business to be altruistic. You start a business to make money. If you make money, you can be altruistic. But what you're really doing is scratching an itch of some sort that you have in terms of what you want to do. So ultimately, I'm seduced by ideas. That's what attracts me to something. So the notion that designers weren't seeing their own fashion shows, because I was in the fashion business, I knew that designers are behind the scenes, they're backstage. They don't get to see how the audience reacts. They're dependent on the people that work for them to give them feedback about the show and how did people respond. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if Halston, and he recognized the need for this, where there was no need perceived before, he recognized that there was a need for this, and he hired me. And I thought, God, I am solving a problem. The designer doesn't know how people are responding to what they're doing. He's dependent on his employees, most of whom are afraid to tell the truth. And they're afraid to tell the truth because most employees' primary objective is to keep their job. So if things didn't go particularly well, nobody wants to be the messenger. There's a reason you've heard that phrase, don't shoot the messenger, because, they don't want to say something that's going to get that person upset with them. So all of a sudden, through video, designers now all over the world could see how the crowd was reacting to the clothing, how the model moved in it, what was the actual response. Did they look bored? Did they look interested? Were they taking pictures? Were they writing notes? All that kind of a thing. Plus, there was another vehicle that could market the clothes after the show itself. So part of the business thinking I had is, not only am I giving something they can review it with their sales staff, they can review it with the press, they can have it playing in their lobby before the people come in to write orders. So ultimately, then they could move it into stores, and the stores could show videos. When I started, nobody had a video screen in a store. That just didn't exist. So I did see other business applications to it, but I didn't start off thinking I was really solving a problem. I could articulate, like I just did, a certain problem, but what it was, wow, this is really interesting. This is like showbiz. There's these women walking up and down the aisle in beautiful clothes. It's lit, there's music, and nobody's capturing it except in still pictures, which does not convey the excitement and beauty of it at all. Now it's, of course, extremely commonplace to video a show. But prior to that, when I started off doing this, which was back in the late 70s, nobody was doing it. So it wasn't as much recognizing or defining a problem as it was, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I figured out a way to do it and make money doing it, because to me, making money allows me to continue doing what I love doing. And that's what it is.
And I think there's something so unique about what you said in terms of being seduced by ideas. One of our attendees earlier made mention of an entrepreneur being, an idea generator. And I'm just curious if you have experienced or have discovered an inherent or almost involuntary process that you employ to validate those ideas. And surely you're seduced by the ideas that you're passionate about, right? So we can kind of move on from that. But when you start to go down that path of saying, hey, there's no video screens in the stores, we're not capturing these, incredible high energy shows that are really like show business. When did you have that aha moment that helped you kind of take that process and say, okay, you know what, this is something that we should explore, almost bringing it to life?
Well, at the time when I started the company, Halston was one of the top designers in the United States. When I pitched the idea to him of what this could be, and he immediately responded and said, that's a great idea. And, I was solving a problem he didn't know he had, right? And when he liked that idea and was willing to pay me to do it, I knew I had something. As I've said, you can't be the only one in love with your idea. Somebody's got to be willing to pay. And it's great to have supportive parents. It's great to have supportive friends, but they're not going to write you a check. And so you've got to get with people who are actually going to write a check, because that's the only way that your business is going to stay in business, is to do that. So when I had that sale, just like with the clothing, when I saw people buying it in that little boutique that I worked in, and then was able to get more things made, and I was able to sell 14 out of 18 stores, I knew I had something. So that's, that direct transactional reality of somebody who I don't know, who doesn't care whether they hurt my feelings or not, is going to write a check for me to provide that service and that product that they find desirable. And then the real measure is if they hire you again. And I've been fortunate enough that that's been my experience. Does that answer the question?
Sure thing. I kind of took you off track, so I'll let you get back to it.
That's okay, but I mean, there is no track. It's just I'm really happy that you asked those questions. And Sylvia, thank you, by the way, for your comment. And Nathaniel, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so I kind of love what you were describing there. And just curious, like, once you made that sale, I can only imagine the excitement, right, to cash the check. How quickly did you move into like, okay, I've got to reproduce this, scale this, and really start to expand? As you think about growing pains, I'm just curious of, how did you approach that? Were you more conservative? Were you more aggressive? What was your mindset?
Yeah, that's another good question, and thanks for asking it, Nathaniel. I didn't think about scaling it because I didn't even know what scaling was. What is scaling a business? I know how to scale a fish, but I didn't really know how to scale a business. And what was funny was when I went to Chicago, when I sold those 14 stores, all of a sudden I had about, and we're going back a ways, and I had about $65,000 worth of business, orders, I should say. And the first thing I thought about was, how am I going to make this? It's one thing to sell it. Then you actually have to deliver the product and bill for it and get paid. So what happened was there was such momentum in terms of the acceptance and purchase of the product that I really had to learn by doing really quickly. And I didn't have any kind of strategic business background. My parents were in retail, so I did know the difference between wholesale and retail, and that you have to sell something for more than you pay for it if you expect to stay in business. But I didn't have an overall plan in terms of scaling and all that. But what I didn't have to learn is who can do this for me, because I'm not going to learn how to do it. I'm not going to sew the clothes. So where do you find the resources that will sew the clothing and allow my business to grow? And my business, by the way, was doubling like every 3 months. So the scaling happened to meet the demand for the sales. And, that was at a time when young people really weren't doing startups. So I was really naive, but fortunately, I was ignorant, but I'm not stupid. And the difference between ignorant and stupid is ignorant you can learn, stupid's forever. And I was able to learn from my experiences to grow the business and learn how to grow and how to eventually manage that growth.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
I just made it up, Nathaniel, so thank you.
Yeah. Improvisation.
Yeah.
I mean, but I love that. But I think the key thing I just hear from you is like, when you've got a paying customer and they're willing to, it just kind of draws you in, and you've got nothing else to do but to deliver. So that's a good problem to have, as they say.
That's right. I think that it's really important to ask yourself the questions in terms of how you're going to do what you're going to do. And this reminds me, I enjoyed Bruce Lee movies, right? They were sort of crappy movies, but the fights were so well choreographed and so cool that I enjoyed watching them. And there was a scene in Enter the Dragon, his only American-made movie. And it's really stuck with me because, I love film, I love literature, I love theater. And this movie, which on the scale of those things is pretty down the list, had a great line, because to me it was a metaphor for life. And that is when Bruce's enemy holds a board right next to Bruce's face. Bruce is just looking at him, just straight looking at him. And the guy hits the board and Bruce doesn't even blink. And then he turns to the guy and says, "Boards don't hit back." Well, what you learn in school is you don't learn about the boards. You don't learn about that. So you can learn how to break a board on a test, but real life hits you with some hard punches, things that you aren't anticipating, things that you don't know about, either through lack of experience, through dealing with the wrong people, through not being prepared or whatever. Life hits back all the time. So the best plans that you have can really go up in smoke if certain things don't follow certain patterns and so on. So I'm not a big believer in prescriptive behavior. The 7 essential habits, there's 7 highly effective people and they're whatever, the millionaire next door and all that stuff. You can't replicate. That's what I call the myth of replication. You cannot replicate other people's experiences. You cannot replicate what they did. You're not them, you're you. Your circumstances are different. Your responses are different. Everything's different. So you have to just continually question and keep educating yourself and iterating on decisions as you build your business or start a new business and so on. There is no prescription that if you follow these 7 steps, you're somehow going to be as successful as that person was. Does that make sense?
Very much so. Well said.
Well, thank you. I should quit while I'm ahead. So thank you all for showing up today. A few years ago, there's what's called fortunate mistakes. And a few years ago, I was directing a commercial for Victoria's Secret, and I was working with the legendary Academy Award-winning cinematographer, Vilmos Zsigmond. And we were setting up to shoot, and for a split second, there was this beautiful shimmering on the wall. And it was like a reflection of light off of water. It looked really cool on the wall of the set. And I said to Vilmos, and by the way, he shot Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Deliverance, McCabe and Mrs. Miller. He was an astounding cinematographer. And I said to him, "Did you see that flash?" And he goes, "Yeah, I did." And he said it was caused by a crew member walking past one of the lights as he was carrying some Mylar. This is not the look we had planned, but I love the shimmering light, scrapped the original lighting concept for the commercial and started using the Mylar instead. And the client loved it. That wasn't anything that I had planned. That's just because my eyes were open and it was a fortunate accident. And it allowed me to turn that into something that was really cool and the client really loved. A fortunate accident led to success. And all creatives have experienced fortunate mistakes or accidents that turn something unexpected into something wonderful. And in movies and novels, we're told that great ideas simply come to us like a flash of inspiration, a bolt of lightning. And that's what I call the myth of the lightning bolt. Creative ideas may seem to come out of nowhere, but they almost never do. You might experience a breakthrough that connects the dots, but those dots have been percolating for a while in your brain, and you're finally seeing the relationships between them. Vilmos, as a result of years of experience as a cinematographer, knew exactly what caused the look and how to replicate it. So another way to answer your question, Nathaniel, is that it's about being prepared, alert, and ready that leads to breakthroughs, so lets you grow a business. It's not something haphazard, and it's certainly not luck. So how can you prepare to experience creative breakthroughs? That's a big question. But on that cliffhanger, I want to go back to James because I saw you came in. James, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, one of the things that I have been thinking about is your book, Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. I've read it, it's phenomenal. Thank you so much for making those available to a select number of our members. I think one of the things, so I teach intro to entrepreneurship at the University of Tampa, which is where CEO is headquartered. And in class last night, I had all but one student was a creative. And when I spoke with that student about their passions, she said that she's an artist, she's a painter. And I said, well, certainly there's some way to, turn that into a business. And she said, oh, no, I absolutely don't want to turn that into a business. Albeit my passion, it's my hobby, and it's something that I deeply enjoy. And if it was a business, it would become work. So what say you to creatives that, are not yet ready to transition into that, business ownership model, and may never be. And then to the entrepreneur, that rigid entrepreneur that I would classify as a business expert that doesn't necessarily feel creative. Right. And we know as a baseline, creativity is a requirement for entrepreneurship. So, in your thought process, is there a way to encourage more creatives to self-employ? And is there a way to encourage more entrepreneurially inclined business minds to be more creative?
Another great question. And the answer is that there's nothing the matter with having a hobby that is your passion and having a job that finances that and pays for your lifestyle. If you're into painting and you like to paint large format oil paintings, it costs money for the canvas, costs money for the paints. And, if it's a hobby, you don't have any pressure to sell it. And so I think that there's nothing the matter with looking at your work life as something that finances those hobbies that you're passionate about. So I think that, if you want to, I have a dear friend of mine is Malcolm Lipke, who is, his painting is amazing. And that's how he makes a living, is painting. And, he, like myself, are compelled to do the things we really like doing and don't mind the pressure. I wrote my book to sell the book. I do videos to get hired to do videos. The play that I wrote and am producing, and we open actually in March, I want people to buy tickets and see it, and I want to make a living with my ideas because that's what I find the most satisfying. But that's me. And I don't think that, if one's bent is that I like to have my hobby that is unsullied by business, that I don't have to be concerned about that at all. It's mine alone, and I can do whatever I want. And however, the one caveat I would say about that is when you write to have your books read. When you do a play, you have it so there's an audience there who's going to watch it. When you paint, you have to be honest with yourself. When you paint, is it, no, I just do this for myself? I don't really believe that. But I do believe that people are very frightened in terms of rejection, of criticism. And the reason that a lot of people feel that they're not creative is because it got stomped out of them when they were kids. Could be by their parents, could be by their teachers, could even be by their peers. Because it can be pretty tough when you put yourself out there and somebody laughs at what your ideas or laughs at what you do. So if that means that you've relegated that to hobby, but that makes you happy, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that's an exceptional way to end that statement, Jeff. I agree with you that in a lot of ways creativity is stifled in the learning process. We see it all the time where college students, they make it to their junior or senior year and they just start to begin exploring the entrepreneurial side of things, and it's kind of bringing them back to a more creative time in their life. So could we talk a little bit more about your book? I know that we've, addressed it a little bit, but, how would you say creative careers really helps individuals, bring their ideas to life?
How does creative careers, meaning my book, do that?
Yeah.
It's a one-stop shop that gives you a prescription for how to achieve happiness. I think the thing about the book, and this is, I'm now quoting responses that I've gotten from people who I don't know, and some of my students, because it's reading for my course, is that it articulates ideas from a vast group of people. There's like 52 different people that I have had as guests in my class who talk about different challenges, how they faced them, how they made decisions, how they dealt with the conflicts in their life, and so on. And there's no one way to do anything. And so I think that it resonated with people in terms of they recognize some of the circumstances, or it wasn't far away from experiences they've had. So they found that, I think it's oftentimes gratifying to find out that you're not the only one that has that issue, and that when you're open and you talk about it, it's a great way to get support from other people. But also, I tried to replicate the classroom experience in the book. At the end of each chapter, there are questions like the ones that I asked at the beginning. And by the time you finish the book, and this was a byproduct that I didn't expect to happen, but it did, and it was great, is that you end up with your own personal journal. And so people have told me that they have their own notebook because there wasn't enough room in the book to write out everything, because they would have this flood of ideas. And they end up with their own journal at the end of it that they've referred back to since reading it, which I thought was really cool. I hadn't even thought about that.
Right.
So I think that the book not only lays out lots of different kinds of examples from different fields, from painting to designing, to being a journalist, to being a CEO, to being an entrepreneur, all of these kinds of things. And these stories, because I think we communicate through story. People don't remember the facts, but what they do remember is how you made them feel about something. And just to give you a quick footnote example of it, nobody buys Apple because of how fast the processor is or what the screen is or anything else. When you see their commercials, what you see is the user having a great time. There's no facts involved. It's a direct emotional play.
Yeah.
And that's what gets people. People don't retain the facts. And in the book, there are stories. And those stories engage emotionally, but they engage emotionally because somehow the reader relates to those stories and sees themselves in it, which is, of course, the best kind of book or movie or play, is when you see yourself in the character and you can relate to those feelings. So does that answer the question?
It does, yes. And I have just one more question, but what I'd like to do right now is encourage our audience to ask, any question that they have for Jeff. You can do this in the chat. We'd love it if you, turn on your camera and speak with us directly as well. As you all have seen, Jeff has a phenomenal career in the creative side of entrepreneurship. And we'd love to kind of hear from you and hear about your thoughts and your concepts.
So entrepreneurs put themselves at risk by putting something out there that they don't really know if there's going to be acceptance or not, as much planning as they do in advance. So I'm saying that because you all, I'm assuming, have an interest in entrepreneurship since you're here. So please be brave and ask your question.
Hey, I've got one. So, how did you put yourself out there, early on? Because I'd imagine really marketing yourself is key to success, especially to close those deals. So, how hard was it closing some of those fashion designers? And what advice would you give people today, right, around self-promotion? Because I don't like doing that personally. Like I don't have the social media accounts, and so I'm testing my ideas and I'm realizing like, crap, I got to get back into the social network, and create those relationships in order to sell and market to people. So curious for your thoughts on that.
Well, for the first, several years of my career, thank goodness there was no social media, and which, I consider to be kind of a toxic sludge heap that's out there. And I think, when I hear about things like brand you, market yourself and all that. And I've been in a number of large conferences on panels and people saying about, so how do you create a personal brand, which is what you're talking about, Nathaniel? So can anybody guess what is your personal brand? What does that mean? Anybody want to take a stab at it? James has said my story is my personal brand, how people see you. That's right. It's your personal brand is really, what do they say about you when you leave the room? Do they say, wow, I really love those ideas. That's really great. Or do they say, oh, what an asshole. Jesus, what an arrogant guy. So your personal brand is your reputation. And that's something that you should protect throughout your life. And you protect that by being honest and not having to go back on things, or being true to the mistakes you've had and facing those mistakes, whether you've offended somebody or whether you just didn't know. So, the value proposition, Sylvia, is a good concept in terms of the product that you're selling. And people invest, for instance, in my play, I've had to raise substantial amounts of money. People invest because they like the story, but what they also believe in, and this is critical for any entrepreneur who's seeking funding, is that they have to believe that you can execute on the idea. And that's what's really important. So I think how you comport yourself, how you behave with others, that's your marketing. And that people have to believe what it is that you're saying you are able to deliver on that promise. So Carly, you're right. It's how people see you. And Dean, it's about who you are. And Maria, it's about your identity and your uniqueness. And all those things translate into your reputation. And when you do reputational damage, whether it's yourself as an individual, so let's take a company like Uber, great entrepreneurial idea. Travis Kalanick was a disaster as a human being and offended many, many, many people to the point that he was out of Uber because they realized their survival depended on it. So you had an arrogant, aggressive person whose reputation damaged the business. And Uber's still doing reputation repair 4 years later. Because what does that all hinge on? Trust. And now more than ever, and this is partly due to social media, so there are some good things about it, is that you're accountable. And so trust is the proposition that you have to offer. And that trust then spills into, yes, I can deliver on that promise. And then you better deliver on it. So if you're American Express and say, accept it everywhere, you better be. Because the first time you go to a restaurant, you put down your American Express card and they say, I'm sorry, we don't accept it. That places the whole relationship in jeopardy. And we've seen things like that in many different fields. So again, going back to the core question, it's your reputation. And I'm really good at marketing companies. I'm horrible at marketing myself because I'm too self-conscious about it. I don't wear that robe comfortably, but I'm fine getting in front of people and talking about what I do because I love what I do and I can talk about it, I hope, with a enthusiasm that comes across the Zoom screen. And I love doing that. But I think that it's, if you've got a good product and you're able to get it out there in front of people, and there's different ways of doing that, that's your marketing. That you've got something that people desire, that they're willing to pay for, and you can execute on the promise you're putting in front of them. And I'm very happy to see that a number of people respond to that. Any other questions? Mr. Zabrowski, did you have a question?
It looks like Kevin might have one. Kevin?
Oh,
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for just going over a couple things that I know I came in late and I apologize for that.
you're holding very still, Kevin. It's amazing how still you can hold.
Oh, okay. Oh no, it's not. Okay. I'm sorry. It says that my video is disabled.
Oh.
I don't know why, but okay. But so I'm sorry. So my question is, sir, when it comes to building that confidence, right? And marketing yourself, you said that that you were bad at that, or not bad, but you had issues with that or opportunities with that. But you are great at marketing for others. How do you build that confidence, whether you go for yourself or for others? How do you build that confidence?
Well, I think confidence, some people never have confidence. The stories are legion of one of the greatest actors of all time, Laurence Olivier, would have crippling stage fright. And he was one of the most awarded and respected actors in the world, but he had crippling stage fright. No matter how much success he had, he still felt that. So there's a lot of people that carry issues that they had since childhood that they never got over. And there's other people that I've wondered, I have no idea why you're so confident, because there's nothing you've actually done that seems to warrant the kind of confidence that you have in yourself. So some people are just good pitch people and good salespeople. In my case, I can't market something that's crap. But if you have a good product, I can help you identify the messaging, the strong points, and tell a story that will resonate. And by the way, whether that's with Ralph Lauren, which I've done, or whether it's Raymond James, the financial firm, and I'm positioning a company that they're putting up for sale and they're brokering the sale, it's all the same thing. It's how do I construct a story out of what they're doing? But there has to be something of value there that resonates with me. I certainly can't market or sell things that I don't think have any real value just because I'm getting paid to do it.
Thank you, sir. That was good.
Thank you. And hello, Maria. And Maria, did you have a question? I'll take that as a no, but hello anyhow.
Well, Jeff, this is going really well. And we had talked about kind of one overarching topic, right, that we wanted to address before the conclusion of today's event. And we're getting close to the end. We still have some time for audience questions as well. But let's try and get laser focus here on whether or not there is a relationship between creativity and entrepreneurship. What can you talk about with that?
Well, I think that there's a very direct relationship, although traditionally entrepreneurship is not defined as a creative act to many, because people say, well, I'm good at business, but I'm not creative. And I think that if you look at the process of entrepreneurship, and the process is you have an idea, whether it's for a product or a service, something, you have an idea. And then you have to realize that idea. You have to explain it to others, whether you're pitching it for a sale, whether you're trying to get money from somebody to help fuel your business, whatever it is. And so there is and it's inherently creative because you're taking a concept from your head and trying to actualize that into a business. And I think that's a creative process. But I think in our culture, which is the same reason people say, well, what's your fallback position? When I started, the fact that I have had an independent film company in New York City for 40 years, the odds of me doing that are microscopic. The fact that I have a play opening at the end of March, the idea of that actually happening, the odds are highly against it. And I'll give you a quick footnote. When I was starting on this path of the playwriting, a friend of mine wanted to introduce me to a producer that she knew. And so we go to his office. He wasn't there yet. We're sitting in there waiting, and all the walls are covered with posters of the plays that he's worked on and that he's done. And he comes in and sits down, we shake hands, hello. And then he said, you know, Jeff, doing a play is very difficult. It's a very time consuming, expensive proposition. It's very, very hard. Most people fail, and you should know what's ahead of you and all of this kind of thing. And I went, wait, time out. And he pauses for a second. And I said, you know, if you're going to give me the risk of pursuing this and tell me how hard it is, I don't need the Theater 101 lecture. If you want to share ideas and help in some way and exchange ideas, that would be great. But I don't need to be told how hard it is to do. What I didn't say, because I still have some filters left, but very little, what I did say in my head, not out loud, I'm thinking, well, you've done all this and you're not that impressive. So you also have to question when people tell you, just like you can't take it on face value if somebody says your idea is good unless they're willing to put money in it somehow. You also need to be able to have the confidence in your idea to move it forward and realize that that moving forward of a concept, whether it's a play or whether it's a new business, is an entrepreneurial and creative act. Doing a play is an entrepreneurial act. Being an actor is an entrepreneurial act. So I think that that's really, you know, something that is important because, again, one's passion communicates a lot. And I think that that word travels, and that word, you know, that good word has traveled about my play. And that's why I was able to raise the money so far. But it's like an app. Every step, every new threshold, you have to raise more money. But it's getting the word out there is really critical also. And James, you were going to say something?
Yes, well, you know, I have just one thing to add. I put it in the chat, but I'll vocalize it as well. I heard this saying some time ago: when you're good at something, you'll tell everyone, and when you're great at something, they'll tell you. And, you know, I think that there's kind of talking through confidence as creatives. This is not something that's just limited to the creative field. I find that entrepreneurs are more often than not afraid to share their ideas because they think it just might not be good. And like you said earlier, they're inherently afraid of those criticisms. But ideas that live in a vacuum never become a business. And, you know, I find that the best way for the entrepreneur to advance their venture is to talk with others about the venture, because you start to have this compounding effect where you know everything starts to flow together, and you start to build a team, and you recognize the areas in which you may not be the expert, but others could be and could significantly help you grow and help your business grow. It takes a village, right? So, you know, in your industry, you know, how did you assemble those team members? How did you kind of recognize your area, your voids, and kind of input, you know, partners or, you know, business professionals in that area to help bring your idea to the next step?
Another great question, James. And it's really important to know what you don't know and to not be afraid of that, because that's how you find the help, which we all need to move forward. So knowing what you don't know is critical, not being ashamed of that and trying to act like, well, you know all these things. Well, anybody who's savvy knows that you don't, especially when you're starting out. So I find that people are much more responsive and willing to help when you ask for it, as opposed to trying to mask your insecurity about it, because it doesn't fool anybody who's savvy at all. And the only people you want to be around is people who are savvy. But I also, and this is, you know, I was trying to think, James, of the linkage of how I ended up here and how we met. Because what happens is, and this has been true in my clothing business, in my film production business, also in terms of the play, is that you meet good people through other good people. And so who you surround yourself with and how you build and sustain and value relationships is absolutely critical. And that's not often talked about because people talk about marketing themselves. Again, marketing yourself to me is, I just have a repellence to it, you know, when somebody's just marketing themselves. But if you treat people well, if you have an idea that's got value and you're excited about communicating it, you don't need to market yourself. Maybe that's a corollary of what you were saying, James, in terms of when you're good, you tell people, when you're great, they tell you, or whatever. And so I think that that's cultivating relationships and building those relationships is incredible. The level of people I have as guests in my class, one of the reasons I've gotten such amazing people is because, first of all, when I get somebody, they have a really good experience in the class. They like doing it, just like what I'm doing now. Although James is paying me a fantastic amount of money to do this class. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to say that. But you do it because you do things for people you like, and you share knowledge and ideas with an audience that you would like to reach. And that's really critical. And relationships are the core of all of that. It's the core of entrepreneurship. You have to have relationships with your clients. You have to have relationships with your partners or the people that you are getting financing from. And you have to have relationships with the people who are doing the work for you and honor and respect them too. Nobody does this alone. It takes, as you said, James, a village, but it also takes a village of people that you trust. And, you know, sometimes you make mistakes and trust the wrong people. I've done that. Many of us have done that. But those relationships and finding good people through other good people is critical. And my presence here is a result of James and I meeting through people we knew in common. And then here we are. And hopefully I'm not screwing it up. But,
Oh, you're doing a great job. And we have an audience question here from Peter Lee. He just dropped it in the chat. Could you tell us about a time you received feedback on your performance and disagreed with that feedback? How did you handle that? And then I have something that I'd love to talk about that as well. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, man, this was painful. Yes. So when I started working with Ralph Lauren, I started off, you know, shooting his fashion shows. And then I got my first big job from him that was doing a film that was going to be presented in front of a pretty prestigious audience at the Metropolitan Museum. And Audrey Hepburn was going to be introducing my film. So I had a meeting, and the first person into the meeting was the person from the ad agency that worked with Ralph at that time. And she said, let me see your film. Now, I had been up and around, I'd been up for probably 36 hours straight trying to finish this. And I was tired and vulnerable. And so she looked at it and said, I don't like the way it starts. I think you should start it. You should start this in about 40 seconds, 50 seconds. You ought to start it there. Don't show it to Ralph the way it is. Then Ralph's right-hand person comes in, and she tells her what she thought of it. Then she says, let me see it. And so she had her comments on the opening. Then the other 18 people come into the meeting along with Ralph. And he said, okay, let's see what you got. And I started 40 seconds in, plays, and I'm sitting right across from Ralph, and he looks at me and says, boy, this is a big disappointment. This is a big disappointment. I thought I could trust you to do something really good. This is an important thing. And I don't even know where I am. I don't even know where this starts, you know, disoriented, and he failed me. And I said, could I play it for you from the beginning? And he goes, what do you mean? Didn't I see it from the beginning? And I said, no, you didn't. He said, why didn't I see it from the beginning? And I said, well, you know, let me show you from the beginning. He said, why didn't I see it from the beginning? Who told you to not show the beginning? And I said, well, let me just show it to you and see if you like it, because I didn't want to get into the wicked politics that business often is. So I started it from the beginning, and then he looks at me and smiles and nods his head and said, now I know where I am. This is great. This works. Anyhow, it ended up being a tremendous success. Jump ahead. I get an even bigger job from Ralph. Go into the room to present it. First, the person from the ad agency is there. And she says, let me see the video. And I said, no. And she said, what do you mean, no? And I said, no, I'm not showing it. You'll see it when Ralph sees it. And then Ralph's right-hand person comes in and says to the advertising person, did you see the video yet? No, he won't show it to me. And she goes, what do you mean he won't show it? I said, no, I'm not going to show it. And she said, well, let me see it. And I said, no, you'll see it when Ralph sees it. If you like it, you could take credit for it. If you hate it, you could say that I wouldn't let you see it. I'll take all the blame. So you're not going to show it. I said, no, I'm not. Ralph comes in and he loved what I did. And I learned a really important lesson there because I got feedback that I didn't agree with. I didn't defend my idea. And then finally, I kind of gathered my wits and came back at it and realized that, you know, my feedback is honesty about what I'm doing and my intent. And my intent may not always work. And it resonates. When I get criticism that resonates, I know it's right. I knew in this case it wasn't. But the bottom line of this is you need to stand up for your work. You need to do it respectfully. But, you know, I'm willing to rise or fall on the quality of what I do. I'm not willing to fall on the sword for some politics in business. And that's what you're faced with a lot.
Jeff, that's phenomenal. You know, we often talk with student entrepreneurs about the importance of being coachable, but also the importance of understanding your audience. And, you know, for an entrepreneur that let's say a you know, medical device company is presenting to an investment board primarily made up of tech investors. You know, that medical entrepreneur must understand that these tech investors may not be the experts around the table and that the entrepreneur is the expert at the table. And so when they receive that feedback, it could be critical or it could be positive. The entrepreneur must adjust and do a little litmus test and say, you know, that is valid and I should pivot, or I know what they don't know. And I can, of course, teach them that and work through that with them. But at the end of the day, I need to continue down the right path. And I think that is that's kind of in two entirely different worlds, you know, a really tried and true linkage there.
And I think I can give the group here a real story that could help. I mean, Maria said we could take criticism as opportunity to improve and innovate what you have. That's true if it's good criticism. That is true. And it's always important to listen. And it's also important to realize that they're paying you to do something. And so there's a certain unspoken agreement that they're paying. And so give them what they want. But a lot of times people don't know what they want. And it's really important to deliver on something that you can defend if you're placed in that position. So my play, which is about rock and roll Hall of Fame legend Lloyd Price, Google him, you've heard his music, he's amazing. Lloyd and I became very dear friends doing this. And we did our first table read. And the director, Sheldon Epps, is incredibly talented. He's a great person to collaborate with. And we're doing this scene, which is about the first time that Lloyd gets high. And he's in Australia. And the actors are reading it at a table read, which is literally have all the actors around the table and you're just hearing it out loud for the first time. And the actors are cracking up. They're laughing. They're really enjoying it. And, you know, my intent in writing it is that this scene is funny and they ought to be laughing, and that was great, but something wasn't right to me. So we finish the scene, we take a break, and I said to Sheldon, what do you think of the Australia scene? And he goes, well, we know it's funny. People were laughing through it. So we know it's funny. It's an interesting story, but is it essential? And I said, what do you mean, is it essential? And he said, does it either reveal more about the character or move the plot forward? I said, no. And just like that, I took 5.5 pages out of the script because he was right. The criticism resonated. And now I use that as a mantra that I want to share with you guys, because this is true in a business pitch. This is true in just about anything you're trying to communicate in business. Is it essential? Does this somehow reveal more about the product, more about the value proposition? In a story, does it reveal more about the character? Does it move the plot forward? And, you know, business pitches have plot too. So is it essential? Because if it isn't, you get rid of it. And that was one of the best criticisms. And I don't even like the term criticism because it implies something negative or something was wrong. Oftentimes it's more of a realization. So in theater, we call them notes, give you notes on the scene. And so there are those times where it's always important to listen. There are times to realize that you need to stand your ground because it's really important. And there's other times where, like in this case, I learned an important lesson from my director, and that was really great. So, but listening is a really important skill to have, not just waiting for your turn to talk or to defend yourself.
That's excellent, Jeff. And earlier in the dialogue, you had said, you know, creatives are always asked when they kind of say what they want to do, what's your fallback? And I think that there's a lot of truth to that on the opposite side, outside of the creative spectrum for the entrepreneur. And you know, from that perspective, what would you say to an entrepreneur that has that irrepressible spirit, much like yourself, that, you know, really ignored that question and continued to move forward? You know, when does the entrepreneur know that this is just not the right problem to solve for them?
Well, it depends on what stage you're talking about. If you're in the initial stages of developing a concept and you lose interest in the concept, and you've lost interest for reasons that are meaningful to you, that you either had an insight or a revelation that this wasn't going to work or whatever. I think it depends on when it happens. You know, when do you have that? When do you have that revelation that this is or isn't going to work? So can you narrow down the question a bit for me, or
Sure.
set up a context? I mean,
Sure, absolutely. So, you know, from the perspective of, you know, the design thinking model, where, you know, we find a problem that we believe, you know, others share. And, you know, now we're at the stage where we're ideating around building a business, you know, around that problem. And actually, I think you answered it perfectly in that, you know, your passion or your interest in what is to come of the business begins to fizzle. Because at the end of the day, it really, not only does the entrepreneur have to be resilient in their drive at launching a business, they have to be passionate about it as well. And yes, their research and their data could prove that there is a customer need, and that's an excellent truth. But if you're not the entrepreneur to solve that customer need, you're never going to reach success in this business.
well, I think that that's right. And I think that the critical question to ask yourself is when you are an entrepreneur, because you are going to face obstacles. That's just going to happen. And so I think you have to really be clear about, why are you doing this in the first place? And although your reasons may float in one direction or another, knowing why you're doing something is going to help you persevere. I mean, James, when you were talking about just that, you know, essentially keeping at it, you know, it takes resilience. When I'm out promoting my book, and I've, you know, doing all these podcasts promoting the book, and some of the podcasters are saying things, what's your secret sauce? You know, what's your morning routine? You know, as if my morning routine is probably like everybody else's. You get up, you go to the bathroom, you brush your teeth, take a shower, and then everything else is up for grabs after that. And I think that it's really important to realize that entrepreneurship involves work. It's a lot of work. And you need to know why you're doing that work, especially when things are really difficult. You need to remember why you're doing it and remind yourself. You need to have the perseverance to keep going, the resilience to bounce back up when you get knocked down, because that's going to happen. And, you know, that is the thing that will fuel you forward. And you have to be able to adapt. So perseverance is really important. Adaptability is really important. Resilience is really important. And I think those are the key traits, frankly, that's going to help you, whether you're an entrepreneur or just a person functioning in the world. Those are the things you need, because things are not always going to go your way. They are going to get difficult. There are going to be times that you're wondering, wow, why did I start on this? You know, if I knew how long it took to mount a play, I would have started when I was younger. But the other part of it is I am really clear about why I'm doing it. Lloyd Price's story is an important story to tell. It happens at the crossroads of the civil rights movement, the birth of rock and roll, and the youth movement, all things that I find absolutely fascinating. And he was an important figure, and people don't know his story. Well, we've been dealing with COVID that's totally disrupted theater. It's made investors sketchy because so many shows are having to close, all of these kinds of things. So you have to have a perspective, always remembering why you're doing it, assessing all the time what's going on. We have our opening date. We have a theater deal. Omicron seems to be receding, beginning to recede a bit. But we've been wrong before. I don't think any of us expected to be in this position now. So, you know, that perseverance, that resilience, that adaptability is what has enabled me to keep going, built on the foundation of why I'm doing it in the first place. And I think that's true whether you're an entrepreneur or whatever you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, we have just a few minutes left in the session. Before we turn it entirely over to the audience for any last minute questions, I would like to remind everybody that the third segment of our Business Formation Bootcamp will be next Wednesday, same time and place, testing the viability of your concept. So audience, if you have any questions that remain for Jeff, or Jeff, if you have any final thoughts, feel free to share them at this time. And I want to thank you, Jeff, in front of everybody, so much for joining us today. Your entrepreneurial story and your passions for the creative space truly ring, they come through in just such a vibrant way that it helps us all get really excited about what's to come. And, you know, our journey as entrepreneurs is ever evolving, and it's fascinating to see how you've touched so many different industries and markets, and have created a very you know, freedom-filled entrepreneurial lifestyle for yourself, which is I think something that all of our college students aspire to reach someday.
Well, thank you for the kind words, James. It could also mean that I just can't hold on to a job.
Well, that's also a very common trait for an entrepreneur.
So thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it. So if anybody has any questions, please speak up.
Hello, sir. Can I say something really quickly?
Sure thing, Kevin.
I just want to say you guys are amazing. I learned so much just from your, like, hearing how, like, the diction, like every word you guys use, to just the passion just behind everything you're saying. It's like, as you said, storytelling, it's taking me on a story in my mind. Like, I can imagine the stress and the frustration that you guys had to go through, but you putting it so plainly and simply for everyone to understand, but it's so simple. But you make it, like, I'm wise enough to know that there's some pain behind that. And I'm hearing that, and that's what's giving me, like, a lot of, I thank God for you guys. Thank you. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, thank you, Kevin. That's very kind. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to ask a question or share some thoughts?
Hi, how are you?
Hi,
Um,
Sylvia.
how are you? I
Great.
was afraid to open my mic because I've been having this battle against not only COVID but influenza B and
Oh, no.
bronchitis at the same time. So
Oh, my goodness.
excuse me. Very quickly, thank you so much for your message to these students who really need to see that, like you said, entrepreneurship is hard. You need to work, you need to invest time. I'm wondering, any message for those underrepresented populations? I mean, Hispanic, low income, uh, students who may not have been around that entrepreneurial mindset from other places. And so they are just basically thinking about, how can I cover my basic needs? So they're, and they can be so creative, but I have found it's hard to push them out of their shells, out of their comfort zone. So what will be your message to those, especially also not only students, but also entrepreneurs? I assist local entrepreneurs who are also women-owned, low income, lack of resources. So to be inclusive, to promote humane entrepreneurship and infuse sustainability, because I believe you can create any business, but what about creating a sustainable business that also helps the community and in all the three pillars of sustainability: social, economic, and environmental?
Thank you,
Well,
Sylvia.
you know, I wish, Sylvia, that I had an answer for you that, you know, could sort of cap everything. I will say that it's important for anyone to realize, and especially the underrepresented populations, when they think that the worst thing is a sense of hopelessness and feeling that somehow something is out of your reach. But the same, many of the same rules apply in terms of having an idea and getting that idea out there. And you can turn something from a thought into an action. And that action is what can build a business. And it doesn't have to cost a lot to do it. You know, initially, it doesn't have to cost a lot to do it. So I think it's that inclusiveness. More and more companies have realized they have to do more than give lip service to inclusiveness, that they actually have to be inclusive. I mean, it's sometimes staggering to me that here we are in 2022 dealing with issues from voting rights to the role of and position of women. And I don't even understand why this is still an issue. And it is. But I think that what you can't focus on is you have to be aware of the obstacles. But if all you do is focus on the obstacles, that's what you're going to run into all the time. So you've got to look for the daylight and look how to move those opportunities forward. And there's no simple answer to what you're talking about, because it gets into really complex economic and societal and racial issues that aren't easily fixed, unfortunately. But I think that the more these barriers come down and the more that people learn how to, like Lloyd's story, by the way, one of the reasons that it's really interesting, some of the people that have invested in it, who I would have never thought would have invested in it, who are actually entrepreneurs, and they like it because he never allowed himself to be a victim. Mm. And that's what's really interesting. And it's quite bracing because he was able to live out his life and do those things by not being a victim. And I think that being a victim, and this is not a blame the victim thing that I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is realizing that you can cross these barriers, that you can do these things. It's not easy, but it can be done. And it is a way of thinking about yourself that's really important, and to not allow yourself to be victimized. Again, easier said than done, but that's one of the things that's really bracing about Lloyd's story. So, I wish I could give you a specific answer and prescription for here's how to remove these woes, but I can't believe that societally we're facing some of the same battles, many of which were litigated 50, 60 years ago, from voting rights to women's rights to all these things. And that's very sad to me.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I put a question in the chat,
Well, go ahead and ask
and
it.
it said, maybe the ability to work is simply the ability to sell things that you present for a profit. Do you need a business to do that?
Well, if you're doing a transaction, you got a business, right? If somebody's paying you for something, you have a business. You may not have a large business, but you have a business. So if you're talking about, do you need all the structures of a business to really, offices, employees, blah, 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 and all that, and you're just selling something where you can be an independent in many areas, sell your services, sell your knowledge, and you don't need to set up a big structure to support that.
Mhm.
So,
Okay, so if the business,
I was going to say one other thing, which is there's always two sales, and this is really important. A lot of people don't realize that. Then the two sales are, first, you've got to sell yourself on the worthiness of your product or service or what you're doing. Then you sell your potential customer. Because until you've sold yourself and you have the confidence in what you were doing that you can present it in a solid and compelling way, you're not going to sell it.
Right.
So there's a double sale that goes on there that I think is really critical. So it's not just the ability to, sell things. I mean, you could be a con man. I guess, they have an ability to sell things and get money for it. But I don't think you're talking about that. But there are many things you can do that you don't need to set up a major business structure around it. And you can still have a business. Does that answer your question at all?
okay, if the business is already registered within a publicly registered corporation, then do I need to register it as a business?
Sorry, I didn't get the end of that.
Then do I need to register it as a business?
Well, that's something you should talk to your accountant about. And you should seek counsel in terms of, what you're setting up. Do you need a tax ID number and all of that kind of thing? I can't answer that, but on the transaction level, if you are setting up a business, if you're charging taxes, if you're billing a client, and it's going on a regular basis, then you need that structure to do it so you don't have trouble down the road.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we are at time for
Okay,
our
thank you.
session today.
Thank you.
Jeff, again, I just would like to thank you so much for joining us. We will be back at this next week, and feel free to stay in touch with everybody. And thank you again, Jeff.
It was my pleasure. And I can give you a quick closing statement.
Please
you would
do.
like, because this kind of wraps it up. There's no magic portal to pass through. There's no secret. And part of making a living with your ideas and being an entrepreneur involves maintaining sustainable energy by taking care of yourself, having unbounded curiosity and the desire for discovery. So you're inspired to keep going and to keep coming up with ideas. And it also requires being able to create a long-term sustainable business and building relationships that can help you, which means exercising sound business principles and being aware of the risks that are involved. So making a living as an entrepreneur and with your creativity is a marathon. It's not a sprint, but there will be rewards emotionally, intellectually, and financially, but they're the byproduct of the work you do. And if you love what you're doing, the work itself is a reward. So I'd like to thank all of you and your attention that you've given me for the last hour and a half, and I've really enjoyed it. And I hope that you've gotten something from this. I know I've gotten something from hearing from you guys. So thank you all. And thank you, James, for having me.
Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.